The music didn't stop. It never does in places like this. The band kept playing smooth, controlled, effortless. Brass instruments rising and falling like a steady heartbeat. A piano somewhere in the corner holding everything together. Glasses clinked softly. Low conversations drifted between tables. Laughter, quiet, measured, blended into the atmosphere. On the surface, everything was normal, but beneath it, something shifted. It started with a voice, not loud enough to command attention, not aggressive enough to sound like a threat, just careless, a single word, dropped into the air like it didn't matter. But it did, because in Harlem, words carry weight, and some words carry consequences. The reaction wasn't immediate. There was no sudden silence, no dramatic pause in the music. No one stood up or made a scene. Instead, something subtler happened. Conversation slowed, eyes shifted, but never fully turned. People adjusted in their seats without realizing why. Because those who understood didn't need confirmation. They felt it at the tension, the shift in energy, the invisible line that had just been crossed at a corner booth, under soft amber lighting. A man sat still, composed, unmoved, untouched by the ripple moving through the room. Bumpy Johnson didn't react, not immediately. He remained exactly as he was. Back straight, hands steady, expression unreadable, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from hesitation, but from control. Across from him sat the man who had spoken. Well-dressed, confident, too comfortable. The kind of man who believed in protection, connections, reputation, influence. The kind of man who thought those things followed him everywhere. Even here, some say he didn't realize what he had done. Others believe he knew exactly and simply didn't care. Either way, he had just tested something he didn't understand, and the room knew it. Because Harlem wasn't just a location, it was a system, an unspoken structure of respect, boundaries, and rules that didn't need to be written down. And right now, one of those rules had been broken. Still, no one moved. Because in moments like this, movement is dangerous. You wait. You watch. You let the moment unfold on its own. A waitress passed by, slower than before. A man at the bar set his glass down without drinking. Two men in the back leaned slightly closer, pretending to continue their conversation. No one was looking directly, but everyone was watching, waiting for him. Slowly, Bumpy Johnson leaned forward, not suddenly, not aggressively, just enough to change the distance between him and the man across the table, enough to make the air between them feel heavy. It was a small movement. But in a room like this, small movements mean everything. The man across from him noticed, of course he did. Confidence has limits. And something in that moment, something quiet, something controlled, began to push against those limits. Still, he didn't speak. Neither of them did. For a few seconds the room existed in silence, even with the music playing. Because this wasn't about sound, it was about presence, some said. Bumpy looked directly into his eyes. Others insist he didn't need to, that the message was already clear before a single word was spoken. Because real power doesn't need to prove itself. It simply exists. Then it happened. He spoke. No raised voice, no emotion, no hesitation, just 6 words, delivered, calmly, carefully, with absolute certainty. No one at the surrounding tables heard them clearly, or maybe they did, and chose never to repeat them because, sometimes, what's said in moments like this isn't meant to travel, it's meant to land, and those 6 words landed harder than any threat. He didn't repeat them. He didn't explain them. He didn't add anything else. He simply leaned back, as if nothing had happened, as if the moment was already over. But it wasn't. Not for the man sitting across from him, because something had changed. Not visibly, not in a way you could point to, but in a way you could feel. The confidence that had been there before shifted just slightly, just enough, because for the first time, he understood something he hadn't before. He wasn't in control of this situation, and more importantly, he never was. Around them, the room slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed, glasses lifted, the music carried on. But it wasn't the same, because everyone there, whether they admitted it or not, had felt it, that moment, that shift, that quiet exchange that set more than any loud confrontation ever could. Some say the man finished his drink and left shortly after. Others claim he stayed, but spoke very little. No one agrees on the details, but they all agree on the feeling. Because moments like that don't need witnesses. They don't need confirmation. They exist in memory, in instinct, in the way people move differently the next day. Because in that room, something had been decided. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with precision. 6 words. That's all it took. No shouting, no threats, no spectacle. Just a calm, measured response. From a man who understood exactly who he was, and exactly where he stood. Because in Harlem, power doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't need to be proven sometimes. It just needs to be spoken, quietly, once, and when it is. Everyone listens, before that night. His name already carried weight, not the kind of weight that comes from loud displays or reckless ambition. Not the kind that fades when attention shifts. This was something quieter, something deeper. The kind of presence that settles into a place, until it becomes part of its identity. In Harlem, power didn't move the way it did in other cities. It wasn't about who had the most men, or the most money, or the loudest voice in the room. Those things mattered, but only for a while. Real power here was different. It was understood, and Bumpy Johnson understood it better than most. He didn't rush into influence. He built it, carefully, patiently, piece by piece, while others tried to take control overnight. He took something more permanent: trust, respect, and awareness. He learned the rhythm of Harlem, the way a musician learns timing, when to move forward, when to hold back, when to let others speak, and when silence said more than any words ever could. Some say he was always watching, not in an obvious way, not like a man looking for trouble, but like someone studying patterns, people behavior, because to him, every interaction mattered, every detail revealed something. The way a man shook hands, the way he held eye contact, the way he reacted when things didn't go his way, all of it told a story, and Bumpy listened. Others believe it wasn't just observation, it was experience. Years of navigating spaces where mistakes had consequences, where one wrong move could cost more than reputation, where survival wasn't guaranteed, it was earned. That kind of environment doesn't create loud men, it creates precise ones. Men who don't waste energy, men who don't react emotionally, men who understand that control starts with self-control. That's what separated him. Not aggression, not unpredictability, clarity. He knew exactly who he was, and more importantly, he knew how others saw him, because reputation, in that world, wasn't built through stories. It was built through consistency, and his consistency was simple. He didn't bluff, he didn't overextend, he didn't make moves he couldn't finish. So when he spoke, people listened, not out of fear, but because they understood something deeper. His words meant something. In Harlem, that mattered more than power, more than force, because force creates resistance, but respect shapes behavior, and Bumpy understood behavior better than anyone. He knew that people didn't always follow strength. They followed strength. They followed certainty, and certainty is rare. That's why his presence changed rooms, not dramatically, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that adjusted it subtly, quietly. You could feel it before you saw it. The way conversation shifted, the way people carried themselves just a little differently, not out of fear, but out of awareness. Because when someone like him entered a space, everything recalibrated, not because he forced it, but because it was understood. Some say he preferred it. That way, no unnecessary noise, no chaos, just control, measured, balanced, intentional. Others believe it was strategy that staying quiet made team harder to read, harder to predict, harder to challenge, because when a man reveals everything, he gives others something to work with. But when he reveals nothing, he becomes something else entirely. Uncertain. Uncertainty makes people careful. That's what made him dangerous. Not what he did, but what he didn't need to do. He didn't chase conflict, but he didn't avoid it either. He simply waited, because he understood something most men never learn. Not every situation requires action. Some require patience, observation, timing, because the right move, at the right moment, can end something before it even begins. And that's exactly how he operated. There were stories, of course there were. There are always stories. Some said he could walk into any room and know exactly who held influence within seconds. Others claimed he could sense intention before a word was spoken. Exaggerations, Maybe, or maybe not. Because people don't create legends without reason. They create them to explain something they don't fully understand. And what they didn't understand was how someone could hold that much control, without ever raising his voice, without ever needing to prove it. But those who watched closely understood it wasn't magic, it was discipline. Years of learning when to act, and when not to. Years of choosing precision over impulse. Years of building something that didn't rely on noise. Because noise fades, but presence stays. And his presence stayed. That's why that night mattered, not because something unexpected happened, but because something inevitable did it. A line was crossed, and not just any line, one that had been respected for years. One that didn't need to be spoken, because everyone already knew it existed, except one man. And that's the thing about boundaries, they don't always announce themselves. But when you cross them, you find out exactly where they were that night. Someone found out. Not through shouting, not through violence, but through something far more powerful. A response, calm, measured, certain, the kind of response that only comes from someone who doesn't need to prove anything. Because everything that needed to be proven already had been, long before that moment, long before that room, long before those 6 words were ever spoken. And that's why Harlem answered to him. Not because he demanded it, but because, over time, he made it the only natural response. Harlem was never just a place. It was a boundary, not the kind you could see on a map, not the kind marked by signs or walls. This boundary lived in understanding, in respect, in the quiet agreement between those who belonged and those who did not in for a long time. That boundary held. But boundaries have a way of attracting attention, especially from men who believe they can move through anything. At first, the change was almost invisible. A new face at a familiar table, a different car parked outside a known spot, a conversation that lingered just a little too long. Nothing obvious, nothing direct, just presence. Some said it was business, expansion, opportunity knocking at Harlem's door. Others believed it was something else entirely, a test, a slow push to see how far they could go, before someone pushed back, because that's how it always starts, not with confrontation, but with curiosity. The outsiders didn't arrive loudly, they didn't storm in or demand attention. They moved carefully, quietly, like men who understood the value of patience, but not the meaning of the place they were entering. They saw Harlem as territory, a piece of the board, something to negotiate, something to influence, maybe even something to take. But they misunderstood. One thing Harlem wasn't just territory, was identity. And identity doesn't respond well to pressure. At first, their presence was tolerated, watched, measured, because Harlem had seen this before. Men coming in with confidence, with plans, with a belief that structure could be replaced, adjusted, improve. They always believed they were different. They never were. Bumpy Johnson noticed them early. Of course he did. Men like him don't wait for it. Problems to become visible. They see them while they're still forming, while they're still small enough to study. He didn't react, he observed, watched how they moved, who they spoke to, where they spent their time. Because every move reveals intention, and intention reveals everything. Some of the outsiders were careful, respectful, even. They kept their voices low, their behavior measured as if they understood they were guests. Others weren't as cautious. Their confidence showed in the way they spoke and the way they carried themselves and the way they assumed presence meant permission. And that's where the problem began, because in Harlem, presence never meant permission. It meant you were being watched. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the pattern became clearer. This wasn't just curiosity. It wasn't just business. It was pressure, subtle, consistent. Building. Deals were suggested. Opportunities presented, conversations that hinted at something larger. A shift, a change in how things operated. Nothing direct, nothing aggressive, but enough to be noticed, enough to matter. Some accepted it, or at least pretended to, because change, when it comes slowly, can feel natural, but others felt it immediately, the difference, the tension, the quiet imbalance forming beneath the surface, and at the center of it all, Bumpy Johnson remained still, watching, waiting, because he understood something the outsiders didn't. Not every move requires a response. Sometimes, The best move is to let things reveal themselves completely. To let pressure build. To let intentions become clear. Because once they are, there's no confusion left. And confusion is the only advantage outsiders ever have. Without it, they're exposed. And exposure changes everything. The outsiders grew more comfortable, more visible, less careful. Their meetings became less private, their tone less measured. What started as subtle presence began to feel like quiet intrusion, not enough to provoke immediate reaction, but enough to shift the atmosphere, to make people notice, to make people talk. And Harlem always listens to itself. Some said it was only a matter of time, others believed it would pass, that the outsiders would realize their mistake and pull back. But there's always a moment, a point where subtlety disappears, where caution fades, where someone says too much, and when that moment comes, everything changes. It didn't happen in a back room, or behind closed doors. It didn't happen in whispers or quiet negotiations. It happened in the open, where everyone could see, where everyone could hear. Because mistakes like that don't hide. They reveal, and the man who made that mistake didn't realize what he had done, or maybe he did, and believed it wouldn't matter, that the rules here were flexible, that the boundaries weren't real, that respect was optional. But in Harlem, respect isn't optional, it's understood, and when it's broken, the response doesn't come immediately, it comes precisely. That's what made the moment so dangerous, not the word itself, but where it was spoken, and who it was spoken to. Because in that instant, everything the outsiders had been building, everything they had been testing, everything they thought they understood, was about to be answered. Not with chaos, not with noise, but with something far more final.